Hey guys, good morning. Today we have Laura Bakosh. I'm so honored to have her on the show today, so thank you so much. Just a little bit about Laura. She discovered the benefits of mindfulness over 20 years ago while trying to manage the stress of travel and long work days. And she used to work for GE, and she shared her mindfulness practice with hundreds of her fellow employees and just had a thought like, this would be perfect for kids in the education system. So she co-founded a nonprofit organization called Inner Explorer, a mindfulness-based stress reduction program for kids in education. Laura received a bachelor's degree of science in Boston College and also a doctorate degree in psychology from Sophia University. She's trained as a mindfulness-based stress reduction instructor through the Center of Mindfulness. And when Laura's not working, she loves to spend time with her family, friends, her two dogs. And fun fact, Laura took a 1 week long bike ride tour through Italy. So not quite the Tour de France, but she calls it the Tour de Pasta. So just want to welcome Laura to the Mindful Life Summit. And again, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
So in one of our previous conversations, we talked about, some of the top three things that people struggle with in today's society. And, and your number one thing was time, right? So how things in life are so fast paced and we're always keeping up. We're kind of like always in this rat race, juggling so many priorities, work, family, and we're always in this um, dilemma of like not having enough time in our day. And so I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and how mindfulness can play in our time management.
Yeah, it actually is so interesting because most people that I talk to when I talk about mindfulness, they'll say that they just don't have time, right? That is the thing we hear the most, that everybody is so busy. But what people continue to find is when they do practice mindfulness, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes a day, they end up more productive. So it seems like they're less distracted and they're able to focus their energy more completely on the tasks at hand, and they end up having more time than they ever thought they would. So it's sort of counterintuitive because taking 10 minutes seems like, okay, that 10 minutes is gone. But actually the whole rest of your day, if it goes better, then you're able to get a lot more accomplished. So that's what people, continue to report when they talk about mindfulness. And it's why so many people do it today.
Mm, yeah, thank you for that. And another item that you talked about that people struggle with is this inner critic that we have. It's that voice in the back of our heads that are, putting us down like, oh, that was dumb. Why did I do that? Or, this constant chatter that we have in our head that is not helpful, and yet we don't really have we can't control it so much, and it just happens. And so sometimes we're really, really mean to ourselves. And how can we deal with that? Because I think that's something that we all struggle with.
Yeah, it really is kind of the crux of what mindfulness can do. And I think a lot of people, thankfully, are hearing more about mindfulness. It's becoming more popular. It's in more magazines and podcasts and things. So there's great energy around learning about it. But I think what most people don't yet understand is that mindfulness can provide a pathway for people to work with that inner voice. And very often, as you pointed out, it's an inner critic. And so work with that inner voice and start to transform it to become a healthier, supportive voice in your efforts towards reaching your potential. And so that doesn't happen when somebody says, hey, just be nice to yourself, or when they tell you you're great, even if you feel like you're not great inside. How it transforms you is that when you begin to practice mindfulness, you start to hear that voice more clearly. So for most of us, there's research now that shows most of us spend like 70% of our time kind of thinking about the future or reliving the past and really not in the present moment at all. And in those times when we're either living in the future or in the past, very often we're not fully conscious of what we're saying to ourselves or what that narrative is. So we're just kind of going along. And as you were using the example, you might be saying, oh, why did I do that? I shouldn't have done that, blah, blah, blah. Well, that isn't usually even in your consciousness. It's just kind of happening almost as a background program. But as a background program, it's still creating neural pathways that are difficult and negative and getting stronger. So when you start to be in stillness every day and you start to practice, even like I said, for a few minutes a day, you begin to notice that thought and those patterns, and you begin to sort of separate yourself a little bit from the thought. It's called meta-awareness or awareness of awareness. And what that means is that a thought could go by like, I'm so stupid that I did that. And all of a sudden, instead of getting carried away by that thought, oh, and I should have done this and whatever that pathway is, all of a sudden you realize, oh, I just said that I'm stupid. I just was berating myself for something that I did. Right? And you just have a little bit of space in between those two things, that thought and how you're kind of responding to that thought. And it's from that place that we can make different choices in our lives. When we start to really attend to that inner voice, it naturally begins to transform. It slows down a little bit. It becomes less negative. It starts to transform into more neutral or even positive thoughts about yourself and your future. And that's how real change and that's how real behavior change occurs. And the last point, and a lot of your listeners may have heard of a person named Viktor Frankl. He was a psychiatrist, a neurologist. He was a Holocaust survivor. And he wrote a book called A Man's Search for Meaning. And one of the important notes that he made in that book was that there's a space between stimulus and response. And that space is where we have an ability to choose. And through that choice is our freedom. And that's what mindfulness literally helps you bring into your life. So it's really, really impactful in transferring that critical voice into something much more positive.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. So when somebody has this inner critic saying like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and then so maybe their first practice would be kind of take a step back and just observe and be aware of that thought. And then there's also, theory about like switching that to a positive like affirmation, or is that something that's going to happen naturally while practicing mindfulness? Or
that's such a good question. That you're going 3 levels deep already. So think of mindfulness as a daily practice, that it's just a little bit every day, and it's protective against stress and anxiety and some of these critical thoughts. It starts to slow those things down and reorient them. And so part of the practice is exactly what you just mentioned. So over time, it doesn't happen on day one, because you really have to pay attention to what you're saying to yourself first, and really kind of start to view some of those things as patterns. And then once you see those patterns, you can start to uncover where they might have come from. Most of the time we have patterns based on prior experience. Somebody may have told us that we're stupid or incapable or whatever somewhere along our lives, and maybe we've internalized that as a truth, and we've begun to work from that place. So when you start to see the patterns and start to uncover where they come from, then you can rework them as is your life. So you wouldn't go from I'm a loser to, oh, I'm so great, because that wouldn't feel truthful, especially to somebody who's been telling him or herself that they're a loser for 10 years, But you might say once you recognize that pattern, you might say, okay, every time I hear myself say that, I'm going to respond with, you know what, I'm a good person and I'm always working on getting better, or whatever that is. And you can work up and it's always kind of based on what your truth is. But you don't get to that truth until you really feel into that space of what's there. And when you do, you start to kind of uncover the real humanity in you. If you believe that we all have amazing talents and gifts and potential, these practices start to bring you into that space of that potential. And from that place, you begin to be able to kind of be real and take hold of your own humanity and go from that place.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I wanted to share one of, because I was working on positive affirmations when I would catch myself saying something negative. So like when I woke up in the morning and first thing you do is like brush your teeth in the mirror, then I catch myself saying like, oh my God, you look like crap today. Or like,
Yep.
and then I caught myself. I was like, okay, positive affirmation. No, you look awesome today. And that did not feel good to me because I didn't feel that way.
Right. Right.
And my coach recommended something called a bridging affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so great didn't feel real to me. It was almost like forcing it, and like it made me feel worse. So my bridging affirmation was like, you look great for 36, so, instead of saying, wow, I look like crap this morning, it's like, then I'm able to shift that. And so I'm
Yeah.
still in that phase, but, eventually you'll get to the, like,
Yeah.
I look great today. I don't know if
Yeah.
we'll ever get there. I don't know if I'll ever get there, but at least it's something more positive than to like
Exactly.
really put ourselves
Yeah.
down.
And I think you bring up a really good point that positive attitude, positive outlook, positive affirmations are really important and they have a place in the process, but you can't shortcut the process, right? The process really is about developing self-awareness. And like I said, kind of tapping into the potential that exists in each of us as human beings. And then things sort of spring very naturally from that place. And those bridging thoughts and sayings and affirmations will migrate as your sense of who you are develops, right? Of who you really are, not who the world sees you at or what people have told you, but who you really truly are.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And then the last thing that you said, or you felt that people struggle with in today's society, is self-care. So, again, taking the opportunity for us to be nice to ourselves, taking those long baths, like nice cup of coffee, or decompressing, or maybe it's that vacation. And especially for working mothers and working parents, where that self-care kind of falls by the wayside, how can we start incorporating self-care on a daily basis mindfully that doesn't take 1 hour a day? So we don't have that 1 hour to be taking a bubble bath.
Exactly. And I think you mentioned earlier, just even taking a moment while you're brushing your teeth or while you're in traffic or just doing something to settle your central nervous system. I mean, just deep breathing has an almost immediate biological effect on a whole bunch of systems, right, in the body. And you can feel it pretty immediately, right? Just kind of taking it down. If you do a minute of breathing, it's sort of like your shoulders lower, your fists aren't clenched anymore. You may even have a little smile on your face. And just those little changes kind of are signaling to your body that everything's okay. And from that place, other decisions and other behaviors come. So, and the other thing is just the inner sense that you're worth it. All right. And that's kind of as we tap into this place of kind of deeper understanding of ourselves, we recognize that we are worth the time and the energy to do kind things. And it doesn't have to be, like you said, a day at the spa. It could just be, quieting the inner critic with a reworked thought. It could be, maybe acknowledging something that you've done really well and kind of spending a couple of minutes basking in that moment, where you were great or you really helped or whatever it was. And then, I think a lot of us are in helping fields, or many people are in helping fields, whether in their personal life with their family or in their job or career. But some of that is really just pausing to recognize the connection between people that you're interacting with. I think sometimes we're so busy that we're like flying around the office or flying around the community, and sometimes just looking somebody in the eye and acknowledging their humanity, your humanity, and just kind of being fully present can be very fulfilling from a heart standpoint. And then that kind of energy, takes you through to the next interaction and hopefully continues. So it doesn't have to be big, huge things, but it's just almost like a headset of I'm worth it. The people that I'm interacting with are worth it. And how do I build, from here?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually think that that's one of the things that people struggle with a lot is like the self-worth, right? And like, um, do you have any ideas or insights that you can share for somebody who struggles with self-worth? Because when you don't have self-worth, then self-care is not a priority. And then we're constantly caring for other people in hopes to like gain self-worth and
Yeah.
or we're overachieving and like burning ourselves out in order to feel worthy.
Right. Right. That's a huge, I feel like it's the root of things like, well, they call them diseases of despair. And I don't know if you've heard that term, but it's a term that kind of encapsulates um, violence against self and others, like cutting, self-harm, that kind of thing, suicide and suicide ideation. So believing that the world would be better off if you were dead, addiction, and even anxiety, anxiety disorders all fall within that bubble of diseases of despair. And so they come from this belief that you're not worthy, right, for whatever reason, based on experience or whatever. And those things can all be transformed through these kinds of practices. So I'm not saying that if you were ready to commit suicide, that sitting for 10 minutes and practicing mindfulness is going to necessarily change that. But what I am saying, and what I absolutely know for sure, is that if children begin early with these practices, there will be fewer of those diseases of despair as they become adults. And when adults practice and commit to just kind of being with yourself for a few minutes a day, which can be challenging, right? We all want to be distracted. So being just with yourself and with your thoughts can be hard. But if people stick with it, those self-worth feelings will become better. So because you can't, it absolutely happens for everybody. It's not like, oh, it's only going to happen for some people. Because as a human being, as I started out saying, we all have strengths, capabilities, capacities, and potential. Each one of us, just as human beings. But oftentimes those things are covered up by traumas and stress and other things that cloud our ability to see who we really are. And once that cloud starts to lift because we're diving into a deeper place within us, we literally begin to see ourselves for what and who we really are. And that happen. I mean, this is 3,000 years of direct experience and 40 years of research shows this. Like there's brain changes, there's body changes that literally enhance, how we think, our behavior, how compassionate we are. And it's really, really exciting work because there's so much hope. The diseases of despair are at an all-time high in our country and really around the world. And we have the potential with a pretty simple and a very inexpensive practice to literally change that in a generation or less, right? We just got to get started. We have to keep going. People have started, but we need it universally. We need it everywhere so that we really see a big change.
Yeah, and I really love your work on, working with kids and starting early, because I really believe that, we carry this trauma or these stories with us from childhood all the way to adulthood, and we're not even aware of it. And then, then we become adults, and all of a sudden, if you're, might be interested in meditation or mindfulness, and then it brings up all of these traumas, and then we, naturally as humans, we try to avoid anything that doesn't feel good.
Right.
And
Right.
so I love that you're starting early with kids, and just thank you
Yes.
so much for your work in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And I want to interject with a story because I always feel like there's there's a lot that we have. It's surprising how quickly children come to this place and adapt in this way. It's actually literally remarkable. And it's kind of what keeps me, what keeps me going every single day in this
Mm,
field. But one of the stories that I loved is that this child, he was a third grade boy in a school in Ohio, just outside of Cleveland, and was in a high poverty school. He was from a family that had a lot of dysfunction, right? One of the parents, the father was in jail. The parents didn't live together anymore. There was some substance abuse in the household and whatnot. And so this child came to school pretty stressed out every day. And very often he was in the principal's office because he could not regulate himself. He would throw stuff around. He would have a fit. He would punch, one of his classmates, whatever. And so they brought in the daily mindfulness program, the Inner Explorer program, and after about 2 months, I went back into the school with our co-founder Janice Houlihan, and we just kind of wanted to check in. This was in our early years of bringing the program out, and the teacher said, "You won't believe what happened this morning." So, we had spent part of the day with the kids, and we had this great time. And at the end of the day, they were like, "You won't believe what happened before you guys got here." And they said, "This boy," and they gave us the background that I just shared. They said, "Since he's been doing mindfulness, he hasn't been sent to the principal's office once. He's been really focused, really engaged in school, much more regulated. Like, we're seeing massive changes." But they said this morning he came in and was very upset and angry. And, normally he would have had an outburst, but they said he walked over to the teacher, held her hand, and said, "Can you come and breathe with me?" And
mm,
so the kids were still coming into the class, and there was an aide. So she kind of walked over to the corner and just they practiced some mindful breathing together. And she's like, "What's the matter, buddy?" And he said, "Well, my mom got taken to jail last night, and my grandma says I'm not going to see her for a long time. And I'm just really mad." So, and I mean, I want to cry when I think about, that situation. It's still so real today. And so they did a little bit more practice. And then he re-engaged in class. He spent the whole day in a learning environment and kind of made it through with these incredible coping skills. And the teacher said, "I don't know many adults that could have gone forward with their day after having that kind of situation at home." And it speaks volumes to the fact that when we give kids these self-regulation tools and these self-awareness tools, they find the strength and they find the ability to literally work through no matter what they face. We need to do this sooner and more often in every school in the world, but we'll start here in the US because this is where we live. We can't wait. There's kids suffering with these kinds of things everywhere, and we can't wait to do this. We have to hurry.
mhm. Well, when you were sharing that story, I literally got goosebumps, and thank you for sharing that. That's,
Yeah.
I, like you, have seen and experienced for myself the benefits of mindful practice. And back then, I just maybe like researched some things online or read some books. Um, but really, mindfulness is very accessible, and
Mhm.
and it's free if we choose to really like commit to practicing it.
Right.
And so I just wanted, to let everybody in this audience know that it's it's something that we can start incorporating in our day every day. And it doesn't have to look like, meditation for 1 hour a day. Or you can start really small, whether that's like sitting at a traffic light every time it's red, I'm taking a couple deep breaths, like being still. And related to what you're talking about, that we're so busy and constantly distracted that we don't give ourselves the time to really like be still and be with ourselves.
Mhm. Exactly, exactly. And once you do it, it takes, let's just say, a couple weeks to get comfortable, because again, most of us don't spend time, you know, listening to our inner voice. We try to avoid that and push it out. So after a couple weeks of practice, most people that I know really come to rely on it as kind of an anchor to the rest of their lives. Like it's a moment where you're just taking your stress down and you're able to focus and just kind of reset for the rest of the day. So, and kids often in the classrooms will, if a teacher forgets, because the way we implement it, the teachers log in and they all listen to the practices together every day. So if a teacher forgets to do it, the students will say, hey, we want to do mindfulness. In fact, one of the teachers from Atlanta just told us after the winter break that she said to one of the students, so, hey, how was your winter break? And he said, it was good, except for I missed my mindfulness.
Oh,
you know, so kids definitely come to rely on it, and most adults I know do as well. I mean, I can feel the difference myself. In a day that I don't practice, I feel just a little bit more edgy. um, so
yeah, thank you for giving us that valuable tool that we, can have in our pockets anytime, any day when we, have that practice. I want to switch gears a little bit here because you used to work at GE and had really stressful, long days. You traveled a lot and sounds like a lot of work stress. And this is when you started to like explore the benefits of mindfulness. And it was so impactful and beneficial to you that you started to share it with, your staff and your employees, and you saw that it was also beneficial for the employees there. And so can you talk a little bit about that and how can we manage our our work stress? Because our work is somewhere that we're 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and if we work at a very stressful place, whether that's not getting along with our boss or our coworkers or the workload or just we're physically exhausted, how can we incorporate mindfulness in the workplace?
right, that's it. Definitely something that a lot of people are working on today. When I was at GE, it was still, I would say, reasonably not known, and so it actually took probably 5 years of just me personally practicing before I was willing to share it, because I was nervous that people would think I was crazy. um, but people would ask me, gosh, you seem really good. You seem very calm. What are you doing? And I would say, oh, I'm just working out. Or I totally wouldn't admit it. But eventually what happened is that I took over a team within the division that had a lot of struggles with turnover, and there was a merging of a couple different companies, and you know how that goes, sometimes not that well. Um, and so there was a lot of, sort of challenging situations on the team. And I thought, well, I guess this is probably a good place to try to bring the tools in. And so the trainer that I worked with, who's brilliant, had created a program called the Corporate Athlete. And so I was able to kind of bring in the practices under that banner, right? So a lot of Olympic athletes and a lot of sports people practice mindfulness. In fact, it's very common now, like the NBA and the NHL and a bunch of other people. But at that time, it's still, it was a nice way to kind of bring it in and make it accessible to people. And what we found after the first sequence, so we did a training and then we gave people the tools to practice every day, which was the critical element. And over the first year, this went from like the worst performing team in the division to the best performing team. And really that was the difference, was that they were practicing mindfulness, and they went from kind of a dysfunctional fighting, a lot of infighting, a lot of politicking, to a pretty cohesive, high performing group of people. And it's funny because I tell people this all the time, that the reason that I actually left GE and started on this other journey was because what I saw in people's ability to relate to one another was just profound. Like we loved, higher orders, higher margins, all the things at the time that GE cared about. That was all great and that all happened. But I loved the fact that people were more loyal, were more connected to one another. They would give the shirt off their back for somebody in need. And it literally just changed the whole energy of the group. And that's kind of when I thought, oh my gosh, besides like the performance stuff, which is fantastic, these life skills, these really important life skills are so needed, in children. And literally at the same time that all this was happening, because we did a second training and this went on for a couple of years before I left. But at the same time, a gentleman named Richie Davidson, who is a neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, was doing this groundbreaking research on the brains of long-term meditators. And what his research showed, and it was using GE equipment, so we were all kind of following this line of research, but what his research showed is that the brain changes in size and function based on, repeated practice. And so think about, as we sit here today, if you said, hey, if I do this practice, my brain's going to get bigger and more effective. Like, who doesn't want that, right? You're literally more connections and stronger connections in the parts of the brain that matter most for learning and for education and for relating to one another. And that was kind of when I said, okay, kids are going through these massive brain changes in these young years. And imagine if we can foster like the most healthy way to do that through these practices.
Yeah. And now there's so much research on like the brain neuroplasticity, and
Exactly.
whatever we practice really strengthens those neural pathways. And so there's just even science is backing up, the benefits of mindfulness. So
yeah, exactly.
It's an exciting time.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be like a real shift, I think.
I think so too. I like to share with people that, because it is kind of a random example, but most people don't know that in the early 1900s, most people didn't brush their teeth.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, we had a dental health crisis in our country. People's teeth were rotting. They, were falling out. It was hard for them to talk, to eat. There was a lot of pain. Some of that disease spread into other organs, and it was a mess, right? So the U.S. government got involved, and the nylon bristle was invented and a reasonable tasting toothbrush, and all of a sudden, 80% of the population started brushing their teeth, and then the crisis was averted. Literally, that was kind of the sequence. And when we look at the mental health crisis facing children and even adults around the world today, this is a preventative practice that would be as impactful, if not more, than what teeth brushing did to dental health. So, I think that there's great opportunity, like you said, to kind of get the energy behind it and really see a massive shift. Like I would love I don't know, I'd say 5 years, but maybe it's going to be 10, but I would love to reconnect with you in that time and say, oh my gosh, 80% of all kids or 100% of all kids are doing these practices, and look at the shift in these, trends.
Yeah.
We'll make a date for let's say 5 years. Let's be optimistic.
I'll put it in my Google Calendar.
Okay.
Okay, Laura, thank you so much for this conversation and just sharing your wisdom and expertise and knowledge. And it's just been really great. And for the audience, Laura's offered a free gift. And so when you, underneath this video, you can click claim my free gift, and you guys are in for a treat. Thank you again, Laura, and guys, see you tomorrow.
All right. Thank you so much. I loved it. Really enjoyed it. Thanks.